Okay, so this will be a swapping video, or talking about the swapping that we talked about in class. So it's a very important concept. We have two variables, A and B. A has value 7, B has value 3. We want to swap the values of A and B. Well, let's just print out the values of each of these. Give A and B for each of the placeholders. Make sure this works. Okay, we have 7 and 3, A and B. Now, if we do, right now, A and B have those values. If we do A set to B. So here's the problem, right? We don't always know the value of A and B. So we need to be able to know that these two values can be any two values in the world at any given time. We know how to swap those values without actually knowing the values. So we're just going to use variables. So if I do this, let's print out the values of A and B. Put a star in front so we know it changed. So it starts out at 7 and 3. And then we say set A to the value of B. And sure enough, the value of B is 3, and A gets set to 3. We have now lost the 7. There's no way for us to get that back unless we do that little trick with the adding. And that's not very easy to code all the time, right? So, and then if I were to do B equals A right after, let's see if that changed anything. No, it didn't, right? So let's walk through this. A is 7, B is 3, gets printed out. B is 3, so A gets set to the value of B. So A is set to 3. And then here, since A is 3 from this line, 3 is stored into B. Now B was already 3, but it still did the action. So when you print it out, you're going to get A is 3, B is 3. So now how do you swap that? Well, we can use a temporary variable. So I'm just going to make up a variable, call it temporary. So I define it, or declare it here, sorry. We need to save one of these values before we overwrite it. Okay, so we're going to use the temporary variable, and we'll do it both ways. I'll save A first. So I'm going to save the value of A. Now if I save the value of A, then I want to then overwrite the value of A because I've saved it. So let's do the wrong thing first. So I'm going to now say I saved A into temporary. Now I'm going to take B and set it to A. And then I'm going to take A and set it to B. Right? You run into the same problem. A is 7, then B gets set to 7. And since B is 7, when you run this line, it just takes the value of 7 and stores it back into A. So you want to save a value, and then whatever value you saved, that's the one you overwrite. Now, overwriting with temporary doesn't make sense, right? The value of A is 7. You store the value of 7 into temporary, and then you turn around and say store temporary into A. That doesn't really do anything, right? A is already 7. So you want to take now the value of B, right? The value of B. We're trying to swap these two. We want to take the value of B and put it into A and vice versa. So now, what this does is stores 3 into A. The next line. Now that we've successfully moved B into A, we need to move the old value of A into B. And that old value is stored in temporary. I can do that. Store old value of A into B. The old value of A, remember, is in temporary. Stores old value of A. There we go. Now, let's try it. A is 7, B is 3. That's how we started off. Now A is 3 and B is 7. Great. So now how does this relate to arrays? Well, in today's class, I told you to initialize an array. I'll call it that. 5 values. I'll give you 5 values. I think that's 5, 7, 6, 3, 5, 1. So I'm going to save that. Now to go through every single element in the array, I need a for loop. But since I'm going to find the minimum, I'm going to make a minimum position variable. Now I'm just going to save the position. I'm not going to save the value because I can get the value based off the position. If you know the index of the minimum position, all you need to do is access that point at minimum position. So let's do that. I also need a counter. So I'll use I. Save that. Okay, for I equals 0, since my index starts at 0, and I'll say I is less than the size of the array because I want the I to correlate with the indices, which go from 0 to 4, and I want to increment by 1. So now we need to initialize the minimum position to be 0 because we're just going to automatically say the current minimum is set to the very first element of the array. The very first element of the array is at index 0. Okay, so with that being said, I'd like to check the current value that, let me make sure, okay, the current value based off of the I counter, right, starts at 0, is that less than the value that's at the minimum position? Now remember, we initialized it to 0. So this very first one's going to be 0, R0, and then R0. So this obviously isn't true, but let's just say for whatever reason it was. Then we want to save, or we want to update the minimum position variable with the value of I. So whatever iteration we're on, if we find a new minimum, we want to save that position in the array. Now, not save the position in an array, it's just of the array. At that particular iteration, I, that index, that is where the minimum value is. We'll save it so we can get it later. So now the next task was to swap the minimum value inside the array with the front value, or the very first element. So now we're going to do the swap. So with the swap, we've learned we need 3 variables. And right now, we're just going to use temporary. It's already been declared. And we're going to store one of the two. Let's store, I don't know, rmin pos. So we're going to store the value at, or from rmin pos, which is the minimum value. Store min value in temp. So now, whatever one you save, that's the one you're going to overwrite. So let's overwrite this. What will we overwrite it with? Well, the goal was to swap the min with the front index, and the front index is at index 0, or the very first element is at index 0. So at the array, at index 0, we want to take that value and store it in rmin pos, because we have the old variable, or the old value stored here. With it stored here, we can now move the front variable to the min position, and then at the front variable, we store the old value of minimum position. So here, move front value to min, and then move min value to front. But we can't use this, right? Because this changed on this line. So we can use the temporary. That's the whole point of this video. we use the old value of min pos at our min pos, which is stored in temporary. Take that value, store it in the front of the array, and now let us print out the array. So on this first one, I'm going to say r%d, and then give you the value. The first one's the counter. The second one is actually ri. Take that, and then I'm going to reprint the array right after the swap. Take out the min check. Don't need that anymore. I'm going to do that, and let's put a star in front so we know that it's different. I'm going to save it. Okay, so here's the top stuff that we did earlier. So this very first set of printfs come from here. I just threw it in the front of the check. It was convenient. I needed a for loop. It doesn't change anything with regard to checking for minimum position. And it prints it out 76351, which matches how it was initialized. Then we do the swap. So we say we eventually find that our min pos is at 4. So at R4, take the value 1, store it in the temporary. Now, take the first element, which is 7, and store it into our min pos. So remember, min pos was 4. So it gets stored at the bottom here. Then the final line here. Temporary holds the value of our min pos before it changed, which was a 1. Right? So then it takes the value 1 and stores it into R0, which it shows on the stars here. So the 7 and the 1 swapped places because the min swapped with the very first element. And then, that gets printed out right here. So I hope that helped.